Hey guys, welcome to the first episode of this Blender VFX tutorial series. This is basically going to be a series where we go from knowing nothing about Blender all the way to making some realistic visual effects and everything from beginner to advanced. So make sure you like and subscribe if this sounds interesting to you, since this will be an ongoing tutorial series in the channel. On this first episode today, we're going to walk through the kind of basics of Blender and then make our very first visual effects shot, just so we can get our foot in the door and kind of see what this workflow is all about. Anyways, let's go ahead and get started inside of Blender. Once you launch the program, you will see this little splash screen. This tells you the version that you're on and everything. Current version is 2.93 or something like that. So I'm not on the latest version, but it shouldn't be too different, just some bug fixes here and there. So make sure you follow the link down in the description below to download the latest version of Blender. So splash screen, we can see our recent files and open up a new file and everything. Really, we can just click out of this to open up that general new file. So here is the layout of Blender itself. You can see that we have the main 3D viewport and just kind of the basic layout of Blender. Now we'll talk about that a little bit later, but first we can change around some system preferences. If you aren't really feeling like Blender is how you like it, you want to change around some stuff and like that, I can show you where to do that. So you want to come up to edit and then preferences down here. This is basically just all your preferences of Blender. This is where you can download add-ons, change some of the things inside of Blender. Say you're coming from Maya or Cinema 4D or something, you can kind of change around some of your input properties, all that stuff, and the interface, what you want to see and everything. So you can definitely change around that to your liking. I won't be going over everything in this tutorial, but make sure you definitely go check throughout the menus and play around with some values. Add-ons are really nice in Blender. You can either have third-party add-ons that are made outside of Blender, or there are actually some add-ons that Blender automatically comes with that I really like to use. The biggest one that I use is called Node Wrangler, so if you just want to type that in, you can click that. So that's one of the biggest ones that I like to use. That will help a lot with compositing our visual effects. The other one that I use constantly is actually importing images as planes. So if you just type in images, it should pop up here. This one is nice if you need some reference images inside your 3D viewport, or if you just want to import some movie clips inside the 3D viewport. This is just really easy to do that. Okay, the only other thing that I'd like to mention here is that if you come to this system section right here, if you are running a NVIDIA RTX card, you want to make sure that you are on optics. Optics is basically the fastest way to render inside of Blender. Right now I have a 2060, so I do have optics running. If you don't, but you still have a GPU, I recommend either CUDA or OpenCL. You just play around with those, see which one's better for you. But definitely if you have an RTX card, make sure you are running a optics. Okay, so now back inside of Blender, we can see some of the buttons around. Just like any other program, you'll have your file, edit, all that stuff up here. File is if you need to save anything, open a project file, open a new one, all this kind of stuff, import, export. So all the basic stuff that you can do in most programs, so I won't really be talking about that. The next one is edit. Again, the only thing I really use in here is just the preferences. If I need to change around anything or maybe download an add-on or anything, I'll go into there. The third one is really the last one that I ever use, is the render up here. If I need to render out an image or render out a final animation or something, I'll click one of these, or if I need to view it in here, just like a temporary viewport and everything. Now in the default layout of Blender, you'll see that we have three little windows, or sorry, four. There's one down here too. We have the main 3D viewport, and that's where you can do all your stuff related to 3D and actual CGI and VFX and stuff. Over here is basically a layout of what's in your scene. Right now in the default thing, it comes with a camera, cube, and light. You can kind of see those right here. And then down here is the properties window. This is basically all the properties in the scene if you want to change around. This can be render properties, output properties, so on, object properties, stuff like that. So depending on what you need to actually change around, this will probably be the window that you'll look for. Now if you want to add some windows to your actual view and stuff, an easy way to do that is to just come up to a corner of a window like this until you get kind of that little crosshair looking icon. Then you just want to click and drag out. This will open a new duplicate window of the window you just dragged out. So in this case, it's two 3D viewports, and so you can change them independently from each other if you wanted to. But what's nice is that in any single one of these windows, there's a little icon up here that tells you what type of window it is, and you can also change it. So let's say I wanted this window to be my 3D viewport, and then I can come up here and select another window. So let's say I wanted this to be a graph editor. Don't worry about what a graph editor is right now. But if I'm doing that and I needed one, I can have them and just set them side by side from each other and kind of work like that. So you're not really stuck to one specific layout. But Blender basically just gives you the layouts that it thinks you'll use the most often. And I actually find that most of my layouts that they have up here are pretty good. Maybe I'll specifically need one or two things, so I'll pull them out and everything. But if you need to close a window, you can just right click in between them and hit join area, and that can close the window. Now, like I was saying earlier, there are certain window presets up in Blender. The default one is up here called layout. So this is just the one that you'll probably end up using the most. But for visual effects specifically, you might use all of these up here. I mostly use the shading workspace, some in the compositing, and then there are actually some more that are inside of Blender, but they don't pop up at the top. You can actually hit this plus icon and then go into VFX. I like to use sometimes the motion tracking layout. That's really nice just for specifically motion tracking. And then also sometimes if I need to do some video edit, like some slight basic video editing, I can also bring that out, and Blender has a nice little video editor inside the program. Next, let's come back to the layout tab. This is the default window layout inside of Blender. We can just go ahead and explain the 3D viewport a little bit. So what we have here is all of our objects in the scene. Again, default, it has a cube. This is the camera right here, so that is what we're going to be seeing when we render. And then also a light up here. Let's just go into the camera by hitting 0 on our numpad. Just to see what this is like. If we go ahead and render out an image, you'll see that this is a very basic scene setup, just to kind of show you what everything is. You have the light affecting the cube and then the camera capturing the cube. So pretty basic 3D stuff. Next, let's come over here to the outliner. Now the outliner is a nice little representation of all the objects in your scene. So if you wanted to select certain objects and stuff, and also later on down the line we'll talk about organizing everything. You can make different collections and all that stuff like that. But it's just a basic outline of all the objects in your scene. Moving on down to the properties, like I said earlier, properties are very nice. Say if you wanted to see the object properties, you can come down here and then go to this panel right here and see all the location, rotation, and scale information, all that kind of stuff. Depending on what you actually need it for and everything, you'll go to a specific panel. But this is where most of the work is actually done inside of visual effects, this and the 3D viewport, just because you're going to be messing around with a lot of properties and everything. Okay, so to actually navigate around the viewport and everything, there are specific shortcuts that you can take. Now before we get into that, I'll show you kind of the lazy man way to actually get around everywhere. So you can see up in the top right here of the 3D viewport, you can see that there's this little kind of cluster of stuff right here. You can see that we have the Z, Y, and X. These are basically just the axes. They're also represented down here as the green, red, and then there's a blue line that goes up and down. If you want to enable that, if you want to see that, you can come here and just check mark that if you want to see it, but I never use it, so I just hide that. So if you just want to click and drag, you can drag around. This is basically rotating around the scene and everything, so that's pretty nice. And then these buttons down here, this is zoom. If you just want to click and hold and kind of play around with those, this is moving around the view. And then this button, if you click this, this will go into camera. And then this will switch from orthographic to perspective. So right now we're in perspective. You can kind of see that everything looks normal, how we would see it in 3D space. However, orthographic will just show you kind of basically a direct kind of line of sight of objects. So say if I added a cube right here and then put it way off in the distance, you'll notice that they are the same exact size. Whereas if I go into perspective, like how we would normally see it, we can see that this one is a lot smaller on the screen because it is further away. To be honest, you don't really use orthographic that much. Besides, if you wanted to go into one of the side views, and to go into there, you can either come up here and press one of these, just click one of these little circles, and that goes in the correct like perspective and everything on the side, just if you wanted to view the side of your viewport and everything. Or if you have a numpad on your keyboard, which I highly recommend you get. If you do not, you'll have the 1, 3, 5 is to go in and out of orthographic perspective, and then 7 is to go into the top view. So that's just kind of a faster way to get around your scene and kind of view the different angles. If you're a shortcuts guy like I am and don't really want to come up here all the time to move around the 3D viewport and everything, what I actually like to do is have a mouse, and if you want to click down on the middle mouse button, that will actually kind of pan around your scene. You can move up and down, left and right, all that stuff. If you wanted to actually, you know, move the camera around like this, then all you have to do is just hold Shift and then click that little middle mouse button, and that'll move it around. And then, of course, if you want to zoom in and out, just use the scroll wheel. So that's kind of just a faster way to move around your scene and everything. And you might be slow at it at first, but trust me, you get a lot faster at it. Okay, now to actually select objects, we can just click on them. It used to be in old Blender you'd have to right click on them and everything, so now they changed it, so thank gosh for that. But you will notice when I click objects, you can see them highlighting up here, so that's very nice. It's just a nice little visual way to tell, and also it has like a little yellow outline around it, so that's just another way to tell what object you actually have selected. Now objects also have their own set of movement options that you can do, so let's select this little box right here. Now if you actually want to move around the cube and translate it or anything like that, you can hit G. That is the shortcut for that. So you just want to hit G and you can move around the object on screen. Now you might, when you do visual effects and stuff, you might find that you need to snap it to a certain location and keep it like on a grid. And so that's where these little grid icons on the floor come in handy. So you can actually hit G to move it and then hold Control, and that will set it to snapping mode. And so that will basically snap it on a grid, just nice and simple like that. If you want to enable that permanently, you can come up here and hit this little icon right here that just enables snapping all the time. So now if I hit G, I don't even have to hold down Control anymore. It just automatically snaps. Also, you might find that you want to move your object on one axis only. So an easy way to do that is to hit G, and then whichever axis you want to move it on, you want to hit that corresponding letter. So say I want to move it on the x-axis, we can just hit the X key after we hit G, and now I can only move it on the x-axis. Same for the Y and also the Z. So that's really nice. You can move it on one specific axis if you need to. Also, you can hold Control to snap it along there as well. Now, if you want to move it on two separate axes at the same time, I find most of the times I use just the X and the Y. Sometimes I don't want to move it on the Z. What you can do is, again, hit G so we can move it around. And then we want to shift and then click whichever axis we don't want to use. So in this case, I don't want to move it on the Z axis. So I'm going to hit shift and then press Z. And now I can only move it on the X and the Y axis. It's not actually going up. So that's just another nice feature to quickly move around some objects and stuff. Now those keys are the same for all of the following. So next is going to be rotation. R is the key to rotate, so you can rotate it like that. If you tap R again, it'll actually go into trackball. And so that's just another way you can rotate it. If you just try out the different ones. Usually you'll use the first one, but some people, sometimes you need to use the second one in specific cases. And like before, if we just want to rotate it on a certain axis, we can just hit R and then following by the axis. So X, there's Y, and then Z like that. And then finally there is scaling the object, and so that just, you know, scales the object. Again, X, Y, Z. And then if you want just two axes at the same time, Shift Z. Now it's scaling on every axis besides the Z axis. So those are the basic movement options for objects and stuff. If you're more of a mouse kind of guy, you can actually come over here and select these. This is to translate the object and stuff like that. This one is to rotate, scale, and then this one's nice because this combines all of them in one. If you just want to select this option, you can translate, you know, rotate, scale if you wanted to, all that stuff. So that's a pretty nice option to have if you just want to select that and not have to worry about all the buttons on the keyboard and everything. One thing that might be useful to you in visual effects is to actually hide your objects and stuff. Say you didn't want this light to be seen or anything. You could actually hit H on the keyboard and that actually hides it over here. If we come up to the outliner, you will see that the little eyeball has turned off, so you can just click and that'll hide and unhide that. A shortcut to get it back is to hit Alt-H and that'll unhide everything in your scene. So just some fast little organization stuff there. Next, if you want to go ahead and copy and paste or duplicate some objects and stuff, quick shortcuts for those are Shift-D, that will duplicate your thing. Now duplications will basically just duplicate and copy all the properties to another object and everything. Let's undo this. If you want to create an instance, and I'll show the difference between the two. So instance is Alt-D. That will basically do the same thing on paper. But if, say, you wanted all of these to be the exact same, now I can select just one of these objects, and whatever I do to one of these objects, it's going to do to all of these now. Compared to if you just duplicate them by doing Shift-D, what you do to one won't affect the others. So it's just a nice way. Say if I'm making an object of like a window in my scene, I would want to do an instance because whatever I do to that window, I want it to apply to all the other windows instead of me having to manually do it for each specific window. So that's real nice to do. So now to actually organize some of these objects in our scene, there are some organizational tools that we can use. Let's just go ahead and shift click all these to select all of these. We're going to make this into its own collection so it's kind of more organized in our little viewport thing right here. So there are two ways to do this. You can either right click, come down here to move to collection and then add a new collection and name it or whatever. Another way is to just come over here. We're gonna do a new collection. So that made collection 2. You can rename it by double clicking if you wanted to. And then we can just click and drag these down and put these in the collection. So now they're nice and organized. You can see that now it's freed up some clutter from our actual outliner up here, and we can hit this little caret to bring them out again just so we can select all those. It's just a nice way to actually organize our actual scene. Now there's actually one hidden panel I use a decent amount of time inside of Blender. You can open up that panel by hitting N. Or if you come over here, you see this little caret icon, you can just click on that. And that should bring it out. This is a lot of cool stuff over here. So like, for instance, based on what you select, so let's say I select this cube, I can now, move around the location, rotation, put in specific values, all that stuff. Basically, this is just a shortened version of this properties window over here. The thing I mostly use it for is to set my camera and everything. So if I come to my camera by hitting 0 on my numpad, by the way, we can come over here, and then if we go into view and then lock the camera to view, basically now whenever I move my 3D viewport, the camera will follow it compared to before. It'll just move my actual viewport and everything and not the camera. So this is just an easy way to kind of align shots and everything, and then you can disable that and everything. So that's basically what I use this panel for, but there might be specific areas that you might be interested in, so definitely go check those out. Okay, now to actually add in some objects into our scene and everything, because right now we just have a kind of default scene that's not that interesting. There are two ways to do this. So first, you can come up here and add in your objects. We have meshes, curves, surface, metaballs, all that stuff. Lights, if you want to add a second camera, all that stuff. So that's the first method that you can use. The faster method that I use all the time is Shift-A. That'll open up this panel, which is the same exact panel. And so let's just bring in Taurus real quick. And so that can bring in that into our scene. Just add some kind of basic objects into our scene that we can build off of and everything. Or if you need a light or something like that, whatever you need that, to add into your scene, it'll probably be there. Okay, so once you have added in your objects and stuff, you might need to edit around depending on what shot you're doing or anything. And that's where edit mode comes in handy. So if we come up here, right now we can see that we're in object mode. So we have many modes. Basically the only three that I use are object, edit mode, and then sometimes weight paint or vertex paint depending on what I'm doing. But I can explain those later and everything. So you can either select edit mode right there, or you can actually hit tab on the keyboard to go into edit mode, which is a quick little tip. Up here you'll see that there are three different kind of ways we can select the parts of an object. So by default it's set on vertices, so you can see these little balls. We can just select those, move those around if we need to. This next one is edge select, so we can move that around, and of course face select if we need faces. The shortcuts for those are 1, 2, and 3 on your keyboard. So 1 is vertex, 2 edge, and then 3 is faces. Now there are many different options you can use up here and also on the side. I won't be going into in depth on all of those just because that would take a whole episode to kind of explain and everything. But the basic ones that you'll need to know when you're doing visual effects and stuff is E, that extrudes and basically makes another face. Control R will add a loop cut, and that's useful, like say if you need to divide something, and you know, just you'll use it a lot and stuff. And then the final one is if you go into face select mode by hitting 3, select a face, you can actually hit I, and that'll inset it and basically just make another face inside of a face and everything like that. So with all this stuff, you can make some pretty interesting objects. As you can see, I just made like a little, you know, cartoonish vase or something. I was just kind of playing around with it. But yeah, there's lots of stuff you can do here. Again, you can like select certain things, hit G, you know, maybe S, or R if you wanted to rotate it and stuff like that. So all that stuff still applies to edit mode. It just depends on what you're selecting. The final thing I want to discuss is modifiers. Now you're going to be using a lot of modifiers in visual effects, so where you find those are in the property panel right here, the modifier properties. If I just wanted to add a quick modifier real quick, I'll say subdivision surface. You can play around with the settings of that. Each different modifier will have different settings depending on what it is and everything. So you basically just want to play around with those if you're interested. We'll be going over some specific modifiers, but we can't get all the modifiers in this. I'm sure there are plenty of tutorials out there of like different modifiers and what they do and stuff. So definitely go check that out if you're kind of interested. You can see that this one basically just smooths out the object we created and everything. And of course you can delete it and other stuff like that over there. Okay, so that is basically the whole layout of Blender. I tried to explain most of the stuff that I use, but of course I might have missed some stuff. So next we're actually going to be going and walking through a basic scene inside of Blender so you can get your first kind of foot in the door in visual effects, and hopefully this will motivate you to continue watching this tutorial series and growing in your visual effects. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up a new file in Blender. You can just go ahead and launch Blender, or just go ahead and come up here, File, New, and then hit General. And I'm not going to save that. So this is the default scene in Blender. Again, I am going to be using one add-on. It's the Node Wrangler add-on. So if you just want to come up here and type in Node Wrangler, you want to make sure that's checked. It comes default with Blender, so it should be good. Now we are going to be working with an image. The image is actually down in the description below if you want to go ahead and download that to work along with us. But first we actually need to import that image into our camera so we can see that in the camera view. So if we come hit 0 on our numpad to go into the camera, you'll notice that there's nothing there. So to actually add that in, we're going to select the camera just by up here in the outliner, just select that. Then come down to the camera properties. Now these are a lot of properties you could do with the camera, but for this we're just going to leave it simple and hit this background images. This will basically project a image in the camera so we can actually see it in the background. We're going to add image, and then we're going to open up that image. Again, link is in the description if you want to go download it. Okay, so here is the image, the starting PNG. We can just go ahead and click that and then open the image right here, and now you can see that it's in the background and everything. If you want to increase the opacity, which I highly recommend just because the base opacity is kind of too much for me, I'm gonna just increase that all the way to 1 just so it's no opacity in the background or anything. So that looks good. Now you can see it a little bit better in here. You will notice that we still have this grid and everything. If you want to disable some of that clutter, we can come up to the overlays, and we're just going to get rid of this, and maybe the floor. We don't really need that for now. Okay, so now we actually need to go ahead and rotate this, this cube to be on the floor. So if we want to come over to that panel I was talking about earlier and hit N, this will open up this panel. We'll need to go to View, Camera to View, and again that'll basically just lock our camera to our view and how we move and everything. So again, there are two ways to actually move around the scene. You can do this up here, and you can see that kind of moves around our scene and everything. I'm actually going to use the shortcuts. So again, if you just want to hold down the middle mouse button to kind of rotate that. And one thing I didn't talk about earlier is that we can actually go into different kind of views of the 3D viewport. So if we hold Z down, we can see all these different views. There's rendered. That's basically what we're going to see when we render out the image. Solid, material, wireframe. Right here we need wireframe because we need to see kind of the outline of our cube to line it up a bit better. You can also select those by coming up here and selecting these little dots. These do the same way. So we need to select the viewport shading wiring. Basically now we just need to position this so where it looks like it's going to be sitting on the table. So I'm going to hold shift, middle mouse click, and then position that right there. Basically just trying to follow the outline of this paper as best as we can. This is a beginner thing, so there are better ways to do that, but I'm trying not to overwhelm everybody right now. But this looks about right, the correct perspective and everything, so I'm going to leave it on that. Whenever you find your correct perspective, again, just come over to this menu, hit view, and then we're going to uncheck camera out of view, so now when we move around, it should go out of the camera. Okay, so next we can hold Z and then go back into solid view. So that is looking good. We want to go ahead and add in a floor to our little scene right here. So we're going to add, so Shift A, add a mesh plane. And then we're just going to scale that out a bit like this. We basically want to try to line it up to the edge of the table. So we're just going to hit R. But you'll notice if we hit R, we kind of rotate it funkily. So we only want to rotate it on the Z, so I'm going to hit the Z button, and that'll rotate on the Z axis and the Z axis only. So just a rough little like outline right there and everything. So that looks good. We'll notice that first of all, the scene is kind of uninteresting. So let's just go ahead and delete this cube. Just select that and then hit delete. Then we can go ahead and add in a new mesh. So we're going to Shift A, add mesh. Then we're going to make it a little bit more interesting with this monkey. And so I basically want the monkey to be on this floor plane right now. You can see that it's kind of intersecting and everything and looks kind of ugly. So what we can do is come up here, we can hit this button, or if you want to do the keyboard shortcut, it's 1. So come over here, select 1. We actually need to go to the side view, so I'm going to select 3 on my numpad. And then we're going to hit R to rotate it. And since we're on the side view, it's only going to rotate it on that axis, so we don't have to worry about rotating it along a specific axis. Then we're just going to hit G, Z. And if we go into wireframe, we can actually see that our plane is right on this little green line. So we basically just want to rotate it and then align it to that green line right there. Again, G to move, R to rotate. So that looks pretty good. Let's go in the camera. So I'm going to rotate on the Z by hitting Z. So only on the Z axis. And now I actually want to move it a little bit over here. So to do that, I just need to rotate on every axis but the Z axis. We don't want it to go above our plane or anything. So we're going to hit G and then Shift Z. And now if we move it, let's say around here, if we go to the side view, we'll notice that it hasn't moved in the Z axis. So it's still resting on our plane right here. Okay, so let's go into the camera view and go into rendered. We can see we have this basic setup and everything, so that is looking good. Now we actually need to change the render engine. We can see that Blender has 2 render engines. Basically, Eevee is the faster render engine. It'll render out images super fast, but it doesn't look as realistic and isn't the one that most people use for visual effects. So the one we're going to change to is actually Cycles. This is actually a ray tracing engine compared to Eevee, which is a screen space engine and everything. So this will give us more accurate results. You do want to switch to GPU if you have it. If you don't, then CPU is fine. So don't worry about that. Now we do notice one thing here, and that is actually that our plane on the ground is actually visible and everything. Now don't worry too much if this sounds a little too complicated or anything. It's really not once you wrap your head around it. We basically need this little plane right here to just catch the shadows of our actual monkey. And the way we can do that is actually very simple. We're going to select this plane and then come over here to its object properties. And then down in the visibility, this is where we can set it to only catch the shadows of an object. Right here in the mask, we want to make sure it's on shadow catcher. And you can see that's turned it gray and everything. And that's actually because that's what our actual world is. If you kind of look around here, our world is actually shaded to be gray instead of transparent. So if we want it to be transparent, which we do, we want to come over here to the render properties, and then down here in film, we can change the film type to be transparent. So now we actually have our final result with the shadow only being shown and our video behind the monkey. So if we now come out here and render the image, You will only notice that the monkey has been rendered and not the actual video file and everything. And that's actually because the way we have it composited right now, the background images we set up for the camera is only a visual representation. It's not going to be rendered or anything. So what we actually need to do is composite in the video to be behind the monkey. And that's actually very nice inside of Blender. We can go ahead and do that in the compositing tab up here. We're just going to go to that. And then we're going to hit this use nodes. Now nodes might be a scary thing for you if you're a beginner or whatever, but really for the sake of this tutorial it's not going to be anything crazy. We'll build up nodes, the knowledge about nodes in this series and everything, so really don't worry about it now. This is going to be a very basic setup. Basically we're just going to hit G to move this down, and then we're going to hit Shift A. We're going to add a new node, and that's going to be our image node. This is basically just going to import that image we've already imported into Blender. So we're going to go ahead and hit this little icon since we already imported our image in, and then we're going to hit the image. So now if you have the Node Wrangler add-on, which you should, we should be able to hit Shift, Control, and then click, and then that should bring out a viewer node. Now you can see our image in the background, but it's a little too big, so you can actually hit the V key to zoom out a bit. And if you want to zoom in, then you can hit Alt V, and that zooms in. So now we can see it a little bit nicer. And then you can hit Control or Shift, Control, click, and you can view the different parts. So now we have the background image clip, and then we also have our monkey. But they're not composited on each other, so we actually need to do that now. So a way to do that is that we can actually add in a alpha over node. So let's go ahead and add that in. Alpha over will basically composite the two to be on top of each other. And since our background of our monkey is transparent, when we combine these two, basically the monkey will seem like it's on top of our background image, and that is what we're looking for. So to do that, we're just going to click the image and bring it to the top image socket of our alpha over. And then we're going to click this and bring that to the bottom image socket. Now if we Shift Control click this, we should see in the background that now we have our monkey correctly composited on top of our actual background. Now one thing you do want to make sure with any alpha over node is I always check convert to pre-multiply. That has something to do with the alpha channel and will basically just make the image look a bit nicer. So I always just check that. So one thing we need to watch out for in here is that we actually have it plugged into the viewer node right now. But if we were to render this out right now, it would only render out this monkey. And that's actually because we have only the render layers node plugged into our composite. Basically, our composite node is whatever is going to be rendered out in our actual scene. So right now, it's only going to be the monkey. So what we need to do is plug this alpha over image into the image of our composite. And now it should render out this result. One final thing that I like to check before is make sure our color information is correct. Now I won't get too much into depth on this because this is the first episode, but basically we need to come down here in the render properties and come to color management and change the view transform from filmic to standard. That'll just make the colors actually match our movie clip. Okay, so now that we have all that set up, we can go ahead and render out our image. Okay guys, here is our final result. We can see that it looks pretty realistic and everything. I actually shot this video keeping in mind the light of default Blender and everything. So it looks pretty realistic. Now there are certain things we can do to of course make it more realistic. But since this was the first result, I really just wanted everybody to get kind of the same result and, you know, confidence in themselves that, you know, they can do this, because really visual effects, a big part of it is knowing that you can do it. You know, it's not just for the elite. You can, you know, make awesome results like this very quickly if you know what you're doing. But anyways, guys, this is the final result we got. It looks pretty nice and everything. This was kind of a very basic introduction to visual effects and everything. So if you are too intimidated right now, I wouldn't be. We're going to explain a lot more of this stuff kind of going throughout this tutorial series. But this was the most basic result we could have gotten. But anyways, guys, hopefully this first episode was something interesting for you guys, and hopefully you're excited to learn more about visual effects and stuff inside of Blender in the future. I know this episode was kind of long, but it was a nice introduction to all the features that Blender has when it comes to visual effects and everything like that. And we got a pretty cool result for our final image. But anyways, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Again, we have a Discord and Patreon. Links to those are in the description below. Also, more parts of this tutorial series are coming out soon, so make sure you like and subscribe for more awesome content like this. But anyways, guys, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys later. Peace.